I want to talk a little bit now about John Chapman, who's a name that I think a lot of viewers are very well aware of, but
Sure.
they don't often get to hear a combat controller talk about John Chapman. In fact, the only other one who's ever talked about him on this show was Dan Schilling, and then I interviewed the pilot of the helicopter. What are your memories of John Chapman as a fellow 24th STS guy? And if you're comfortable, could you explain kind of to the audience who are maybe new viewers what makes John Chapman such a heroic figure?
Yeah. So John and I were at the unit together. Our times were a little bit overlapping. So when John showed up and he was going through our assessment selection process in the year of training, when he got to the team, he got there probably 6 months before. Then I left and I went and became an instructor for 3 years. He spent time on red team. I was on blue team. And then by the time I got back, John had moved to a different team in the unit. Um, but John and I had gone to a couple of schools together, and we'd gone on some training trips together. But I wouldn't say we were tight. Like Dan Schilling and I were tight. Some of these other names I've said, I spent a whole career working with. John and I had intermittent times together. But John was an impressive figure. John had a unique ability to understand risk and accept risk. We were at a school and they one day they're like, "Hey, you guys can't do this thing." And as soon as they walked out of the room, John's like, "Fuck them, we're doing this." And I went, "Okay, let's understand why we're doing this." And he said, "Here's why we're going to do it." I'm like, "Okay, I'm on for the ride." We did it, and the cadre will say got upset about it, but at the end of the day, they went, "You were right. You're good to go." So I immediately, built confidence in John's decision making. And for me, leadership and decision making was something I was always trying to work on and get good at. So I had yet one more data point in my life where I went, okay, I learned something from a dude, which is pretty impressive. Um, when I got back to the 24th and 9/11 kicked off, I got back on 9/12. I deployed on October 19th. John had been at the unit for the previous 3 years, and he wasn't on the initial deployment. There's a counterbalance there, right? Like the fuck, Mike's coming back and Mike's automatically deployed, and I've been here. But John was already assigned to do certain things, and I was a freelancer. Like I came in, they could put me anywhere, and it didn't matter. Um, the point being is, John fought really hard to get on the very next deployment because they weren't going to send him on that one. And he actually went in the commander's office and said, "This is fucking bullshit. I've been in combat control my whole career. I've missed other big engagements. We need guys to go down range. I'm going down range." And he stood on the commander's desk and gave him a little bit of what for, if you will. And that's how John ended up down range. He had to fight his way to get down range. There was a point where, and this is in the book, where John was up in Dam Neck getting ready to deploy, and a family member had gotten sick, and we wanted to get John home and replace him for a period of time. So I took one of our teammates, Jack, up to replace John, and me and John drove back together. And we had a really neat um, discussion. It was a especially intimate discussion where we were talking about what was going on in the world and what's important in life and why we should do things. And John's one of the things that stood out to me that night. When he said it, I knew it was an important thing for me. He's like, "Everything I do, life is for my family. There's nothing else in the world that matters anything more to me." He said, "I'm here about the team. I love country. I love God. I love doing what we do." He's like, "This is all about my family and raising my family the right way and giving my daughters all the opportunity in the world." And that's who John was. And if you get to read the book, you'd see scenarios throughout his life where he was always focused on other people, whether it was a handicapped kid in his neighborhood, athletes on teams with him where he was trying to help them get better, or even his siblings, always looking out for them and pushing them to be better. It's just who John was. And it was a pleasure being on team with John. And I'll never forget the morning I came in when we found out John had died. Um, you could feel something different in the unit. And we're all going, "What the fuck's going on?" And you immediately get mad at headquarters because they're not telling you anything. About 30 minutes into it, they called us in for a muster, and that's when they told us John had passed. Um, and the guy who took his place going over, and then John went and relieved him, and he came back. He was on my team. Jack was on my team, and Jack took it particularly hard, right? Because he was going, "Man, if I'd have just stayed 2 more weeks, that would have been me, not John." Um, but that's not what John wanted. John wanted to be forward in the fight. John wanted to do the best he could and take care of his teammates. And John wanted, to do the right thing for our country. So he put himself out there. He's just a great dude. I have the benefit, excuse me, of being very close with his family. So it took forever to get John's Medal of Honor approved. When they finally did, I lived, it's a couple miles from John's mom. So the command called me, and I was retired at this point. They said, "Hey, we need an escort for John's mom. Would you do that?" And I absolutely said, "I'm honored to." So I flew with John's mom, his brother, his nieces, his sister. We all went out to DC together, spent the whole week together, and then flew home together. And I have a really strong bond with the entire Chapman family now, and I'm grateful for it.
And that is so neat as an American to hear that behind. I mean, we've all seen the video. I feel like most people watching this have seen the video, which Dan Schilling narrates. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it on
Yeah.
YouTube. So you see that side of it. Now we're hearing what he was like behind closed doors. It turns out he's just an incredible human, family man, an American. When you watch that footage and you see him kind of make that stand where he's engaging the enemy and he just, I don't want to say refusing to die, but he's just got no quit in him. How does that make you feel as a fellow CCT and as a guy who knew him?
Yeah, well, first, whenever you see something like that, the big Valor Award, Silver Star, Air Force Cross, Medal of Honor, like it pulls at everything inside you. You watch it and you go, wow, like that person did something that is just absolutely incredible. Having the benefit of knowing John, it wasn't a huge surprise, but um, it was great to see him recognized. Like there was a lot of banter back and forth about who did what, and you know, to be able to have video proof and understand who was who on the battlefield. The way they did that is former Navy guy who was trying to become a combat control officer got injured in our pipeline. And the wing commander said, "Hey, I want you to go figure out how we can pull all this video together." And technology had just come to a state where they could do that. And there was a piece of technology that could tag a piece of equipment. So they tagged John's gun. And no matter where his gun was on whatever film, whichever platform was filming him, is how they tracked John on the battlefield. So that was the technology they used. And then to be able to definitively go, these are the things John did. Um, it was great to be able to recognize John. It was awesome for Val and his girls to be able to go, yes, my dad did these things. For his sisters and his brother and his mom. I'll also tell you for the community, it was a hell yeah moment, because there was a lot of conjecture about who did what. But to be able to solidify and go, yep, this is what John did. Everybody was able to rally behind John. It was a unifying moment, if you will. So it was powerful.
I absolutely love hearing that. And if you're watching this right now and you want to learn more about John Chapman, you can read Alone at Dawn, written by Dan Schilling. There's also plenty of articles online as well, but a great American, an American hero, no doubt about that. And I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to shine a light on who John Chapman was. I know the audience appreciates it even more than I do.